The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Mallory Erickson helps nonprofits feel better, do better, and raise more from the right funders so they can stop hounding people for money. Several years ago, as an executive director, Mallory turned an organization from a $300,000 one into a $3 million one, thanks to working 70 hours a week to keep everything afloat. She was driven by the dream to make a positive impact in this world, but she didn't know how to get off the hamster wheel. Times have changed, but the best practices for the nonprofit fundraising sector have stayed the same. When we look deeper with openness and honesty, we'll see those best practices just aren't working anymore. Mallory believes to her core that the nonprofit sector can solve the problems of the world, but now believes in order to do this, we must be ready to change. Mallory says, by adopting new ways of fundraising and operating, we will not only change how much we fundraise, but will change the way we feel about fundraising. In her recently released book, What the Fundraising? Embracing and Enabling the People Behind the Purpose, she challenges the scarcity mindset in the sector and offers a path to sustainable, joyful fundraising. To keep her focus, Mallory holds tight to her core values, including alignment. Mallory knows from personal experience that being true to ourselves is key to sustainable fundraising success. Welcome back to the Connector Next Door and to another great conversation about what connection means to us as planners. Mallory, you're coming to us from California. Thank you so much for taking the time. Love the name of your new book. Welcome here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
For those of you that are out there that are planning and promoting your own events, but they happen to be fundraisers, or you have some kind of a really key return on that investment that you need to make, I'm so glad that you're here because we're going to dive into all of that. But before we get started, Mallory, what does connection or the word connection mean to you?
Yeah, I think about connection a lot in terms of like, do I feel connected? Right? Like, do I feel connected in that moment? Do I feel like I mean, maybe this is too sort of sciencey or somatic, but like, am I sort of like co-regulating with the person? Like, are all the parts of us connected to each other? Can I feel their heart? Can I feel their excitement? Can I feel their grief and their sadness? Are we together? Like, are we really connected in this moment? And so when I think a lot about sort of cultivating connection or creating opportunities for connection, it's really almost like on that kind of biological level of like me as a human connected to you as a human.
When you start to think about all the parts of us that show up to any occasion or to any interaction, and that we are maybe even subconsciously sometimes connecting to things that we can't quite put our finger on it, but we're feeling like there's something we get curious about. Is that something that you found that has been part of how you've grown up, or where does that come from for you?
I mean, honestly, no. Well, yes and no, perhaps. I mean, maybe it came initially from subtly in the background, noticing a difference between when I felt like my whole self and when I felt like I was performing. But then not really until my late 20s did I sort of have an experience where I realized I had been like in a relationship that was really unhealthy for me, in a lot of dynamics that were really unhealthy for me. And I realized that I wasn't connected to myself, that I wasn't really connected to most of the people around me, that I was like adhering to a lot of the rules of connection without actually feeling connected inside of me. And I think other people felt connected to me, but that was maybe more because of my people-pleasing tendencies, or my helpfulness, or me being kind, but not really me being like my true, authentic, connected self.
When you're saying about when we get kind of lost in that people pleasing, or we get lost in, and I'm not saying that was your experience
Oh, it
necessarily.
was. Don't worry, you can say
Okay,
it.
we're talking on the same level here. We spend a lot of our time, and I think a lot of people that get into event planning, or the people that I love to work with, there is not only an expectation to do a job, and we commit to doing something, and we put all of ourselves and our passion into it, but there also is this level of, we want to be liked. We want them to see how hard we're working. We want them to see that we've got them, and or that we understand them, and we get sometimes lost in that process, and we wonder then why we are feeling disconnected to others in our work, or to our work, where we're not really able to find ourselves again. What was it for you that you actually started to find what truly mattered to you, and what made you feel authentically connected to others?
Mhm.
If you don't
Well,
mind sharing.
yeah, no, I have shared publicly before, so I'm okay to do it again. But you're bringing up this really interesting point that I'm like sort of thinking about for myself, which is like that interconnectedness of belonging and connection, and
Mm,
like how sometimes our desperation for belonging, which I certainly experienced in my life, had me like self-abandon in ways that actually didn't allow me to be authentically connected, but to maybe feel more like I belonged. And
mm,
I'm not hard on myself about that phase of my like personhood. Like, I think there were a lot of reasons why I was that way. That felt like how I, kept myself safe and survived, and like I was using the tools I had available to me at the time. And so, I say all of this not sort of like cringing about who I was, and just sort of like seeing that version of myself with a lot of, compassion for sort of like who that version of me was. I mean, actually the story is pretty bananas. But basically I had been in a very long-term relationship. We were about to get married. We had bought a house together, sort of all these things. And there were a lot of reasons why I was in the relationship. As toxic as it was, I really loved the person. I got a lot of sense of like a lot of validation of self from not him, but the relation, but being able to have successfully had that relationship. There was a lot of
mm.
sort of societal pressure around the timeline and the pieces and all these things. Anyways, I got really sick, like really, really sick, maybe almost pneumonia. They weren't sure. And in my like fever induced state, had the same dream 3 days in a row. I dreamed that he broke up with me, or he ended our relationship. And instead of being really sad, I turned into a bird and I flew away. And on the first night, on the third night of having the same dream, I like remember the moment I sat up in bed and I was like, what is happening? And I just asked myself subconsciously, like, do I feel trapped? And all of a sudden, every hair on my body stood up, every cell of my body like screamed yes. And honestly, I think it was like the first time I felt my like true self, my like actual, real, authentic self. And I let myself hear it. And then I had this moment of like, oh, like F. Because what I realized in that moment was like, now I had a really big and terrifying choice to make, right?
Mm.
I either push that thought away, rationalize my feeling, convince myself that that came from my fever and my
Mm.
pneumonia or whatever. And I get to keep everybody around me happy. I get to continue on my path. I get to have kids in the time frame I'm supposed to have kids in. I get to keep everything sort of on the rails. Or I listen to myself. I lose likely a lot of my community, my like love, my every belief I had about my future, potentially my motherhood time, like my ability to have kids, my, everyone was going to be so mad at me, even maybe the people I wasn't going to lose for a lot of reasons that we won't get into on the show. Anyways, and so I was like, I couldn't, as terrified as I was to sort of like burn it all down, I just couldn't imagine. I was like, you get one life. What are you going to do? You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that you didn't listen to yourself when you knew. Like, what kind of a life is that
So,
to know that for the rest of your life and have pushed it away? And so I burned it all down.
wow. And I think that when we get to that point where there is no going back, there's no unseeing the bird or what's we set that intention there's something else that is possible for us, but then there's a lot of other consequences and the reality of it that many of us, when we're faced with that, choose something different or choose maybe the easier for now path, even though it might
Mm-hmm.
not free us. What an incredible story. And for you to be able to come to a place where you can talk about connection and possibly do you feel connection in a different way now and feel more like that bird that has now found some freedom, but then also found a new way to connect with others?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the outcome of that, of truly losing half of my friends, having everybody be mad at me, like the backlash of this situation was that it formed a deep connection with myself. Like at the end of the day, I had my own back. And what happened after that was that that was really all that ultimately mattered. And I saw what it looks like to stay in connection with myself despite everything else that is happening around me. And that, like my connection with myself, my self compassion for myself, like that is what allows me to connect with other
Mm.
people because
Hmm.
that's how I know I am being me.
Yeah. And that you've done that work. And I'm guessing you still need to do the work of stepping out of the shadows or finding that freedom or saying, okay, is this me or is this something else that, is making an influence on what I'm deciding to do today?
Totally. I mean, I'm self-coaching every second of every day, right? Like, I mean, well, one, absolutely, while that was happening, I had a therapist. I have coaches multiple times throughout my life. I go back into therapy. I've had somatic therapists, cognitive therapists, like I deeply believe in those tools, like not just as a practitioner, but as like a recipient of those expertise. And so like I think that's like one part. And then yeah, I mean, I don't think maybe there are some people who are at such an authentic level that they none of the chatter of situations or environment or the outside world get in, but I'm not that person. And like who I was for 27 years is still absolutely a part of me. And so like
Hmm.
constantly like feeling like inside of me is this strainer sort of, right? Or this like
Hmm.
sifter where I'm constantly figuring out, and I make mistakes all the time. I say yes to something and then later I'm like, "Ooh, Mallory, that was the people pleasing you that did that. You did not really want to do that and you can feel that resistance now. Okay, like reflect on it.
Mm.
It's okay. You're learning again, a good reminder." So yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
we're all always in it.
Yeah. And it becomes a little more like course correction. If you're driving a car, it's not so much that we're now heading off of the cliff or something else is happening that there's a dramatic change. But if we start to become aware of it, I love how you're saying it's just like, oh, there it is. And then how do we now navigate through it or make other choices that we're going to be, just correcting back to ourselves again. I love that. You're coming out with a book, so let's chat a little bit about the book, and I'd love to hear what kind of brought you to the work you do, because all of that, I'm sure, has informed or inspired maybe how you're showing up for those that are raising funds for nonprofits or charities. Could you tell us a little bit about the book, and then let's backtrack a little bit to how you got there?
Yeah. So, after I sort of went through this whole big thing personally, I then I think like once you start to find like alignment in certain parts of your life, or you start to feel more connected in certain parts of your life, it sort of becomes more obvious when you aren't that person in other parts of your life, right? So it was
Yeah.
like as this thing started to happen, it became a lot more evident at different points, like, oh, like that doesn't feel good, right? Like now that I feel good in myself and in my body, I have a different ability to sort of evaluate the relationships in my life and what's working for me, what isn't working for me. And so what I found was that like all these parts of my personal life got in alignment kind of over this like 2-year period. I ended up a year later meeting who is now my husband. And uh and, but then I was still experiencing this tension, this resistance in my work, and I was burning out in my work. And
Hmm.
that really like highlighted for me, okay, there's something here. There's sort of a way in which I haven't applied this this being myself to my work in running a nonprofit, which involves a ton of fundraising, right? And I
Hmm.
ended up having this combination of life experiences. I got certified then as an executive coach myself. I got trained in habit and behavior design and design thinking. And those frameworks really came together and made me realize, oh, yeah, like, no, I'm compartmentalizing this true self the moment I step into my fundraising role. And why is that happening? It's because I have discomfort talking about money. It's because I have concerns about how much value I'm bringing to the table. It's because I have beliefs that I'm begging people to do something that they don't really want to do. And what happens when I apply all these different frameworks to my fundraising? And what I found was tremendous success, both financially. I helped move an organization from 1 million to 3.8 million pretty quickly. But more than that was that I started to feel fundamentally different. I started to feel like that connected, real version of myself in my fundraising. I wasn't burning out. I was having really meaningful conversations and relationships with donors that felt good to both of us. And so that sort of set me out on this quest to understand better what is happening inside the brains and bodies of fundraisers, the role that stress and burnout play in basically turning off the parts of our brain and body that create connection. So we tell fundraisers all the time, just build relationships. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. But like when they're in a state of chronic stress and they are in survival mode and all of the parts of their brain have shut down other than the things required to conserve energy and keep them alive, they are actually not available biologically to connect or create connection or be empathetic or creative or flexible or all these things we want them to be. And so that really opened up my own sort of like research and journey into sort of like understanding this cycle of connection, right? Is like stress and burnout inhibit us from being able to connect. And yet connection is one of the solutions to stress and burnout, right? Social connection and all those things. And so I was like, we have to figure out a way to help fundraisers come back into themselves, come back into their bodies, and be embodied in their role so that they can start to connect with donors in real ways, because that's actually going to feel really good and it's going to fuel their fundraising.
Hmm. When you're coming to a place of the whole person, like where we're really looking at ourselves as a whole person and how we show up is how we show up everywhere. And I believe that that is a scary proposition, but it also is something that's very true and can be very freeing. What do you hope that somebody is going to walk away from in reading that book? I'm sure that there's going to be lots of practical tips, but are you touching on that, the humanity of fundraising in all of this and how to stay connected with ourselves? And then how do we connect better with others? Is that part of what you're going to be sharing?
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, the whole first part of the book is sort of the problem is like, how did we get here? We're seeing in the nonprofit sector a decline in giving. We're seeing this staffing crisis. And so I talk about a little bit about the history of the sector, how it's led to these scarcity beliefs that really shape the sector, how those scarcity beliefs lead to this transactional way of fundraising that feels bad to the fundraiser and to the donor, and really how the giving decline and staffing crisis are not separate problems. And then I talk a lot about what is happening inside the brains and bodies of fundraisers, the elements of fundraising that lead to chronic stress and burnout, and helping fundraisers understand the difference between discomfort and chronic stress and burnout. Because I think sometimes when we talk about these topics, we get a little bit too casual around talking about feelings as like good or bad, or like comfortable and uncomfortable, right? And discomfort is not bad. And a lot of times it's actually very necessary, especially in social impact and nonprofit work. And it's a sign of growth, and it is, necessary to bring us into more alignment. Like I was wildly uncomfortable when I made the decision that we talked about earlier, right? So helping them really be able to sort of understand what's happening, I think feel acknowledged and validated in their experience, recognize that they're not alone, know that they've been taught a lot of quote unquote strategies that are really dysregulating, and start to be able to bring more awareness into sort of the different phases of this experience that are happening for them. Then the second part of the book is all about solutions. So the first part is my coaching framework. Then I talk about really how do you identify aligned partners. I talk about sort of the methodology behind all of this is what I call alignment fundraising. And then the last chapter is all about connection and how you create connection. And one of the things, I'm not the only person at all to talk about alignment in fundraising, but one of the things in alignment fundraising, sort of like capital A, capital F, is like personal alignment that enables our alignment with others. So a lot of like alignment can be a strategy, but my goal is that alignment is an intention. And your ability to have alignment as an intention requires connection to self. It requires coaching tools that allow you to stay in alignment, even when those scarcity beliefs want to pull you out of it, right? And so it's really these sort of like concentric circles of like personal alignment, organizational alignment, and funder alignment. And that's the book really walks you through that sort of step by step.
What I'm hearing you say is, what if there was another space here for us where we could move forward with all of those to-dos, but do it with more clarity, do it with more calm, and even kindness to each other. Sometimes we start to get blinded to the people around us if we're really living under that stress.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the way I would think about it really for any job, like including event planning, is really sort of stepping back and thinking about the experience before you sort of think about the tasks, right? So what do you want people to experience when they get to your event? Like, what do you want? How are they going to feel connected to each other and to whether it's your organization or your business or you at that event? And like, what does it look like? And then designing the elements around that connection, right? I feel like we make a lot of times events, like especially in the nonprofit sector, we sort of rinse and repeat year after year. But context is changing and environments are changing and your donors are changing, right? Like if you've had a lot of donors for 10 or 20 years, they want different things at an event today than they did 20 years ago. I think about organizations that are bringing in a lot of donors, in their 20s, 30s, 40s who have little kids, and like what happens when they shift their event from being a morning brunch with kids where everybody gets to get dressed up and there's a photo area with, family photo area versus, the evening gala when you have to find a babysitter and somebody's going to be sick and, and so we go right into the operations a lot of time without really diving into the empathy of the people we want to feel connected to there. So like that's one sort of piece. And then the like sort of individual piece before that is like your own kind of intention around it, right? Like the more you are honest about your goals and your intention, like your real intention for doing this event, the more authentic you're going to be able to be in designing whatever event that is. So if you are a nonprofit and your true intention is to raise money, you cannot say, oh, this is just a fundraiser and we want to just get everybody together and it's going to be casual, because underneath the whole time is going to be this pressure to raise money, and it's going to make the whole thing disingenuous. There is nothing wrong with having an event that is about raising money, but being clear and transparent and honest with ourselves, our teams, guests, like from the beginning, is a really important component.
I often talk about events being connection points over time. So it's one connection point in many connection points you're going to have with a donor, for example. And so it doesn't mean that we can't really get to a point where we're having an event where we're asking for the funds, or we're now talking about the money or the budget or the needs we have for a new program or something like that. But what I love about what you're saying is that if we can be open and transparent and free, like doesn't everyone want to feel like they're that bird kind of leaving the cage? And what a beautiful thing to just release the control. Just say, what if there would be an event where we allow people to be truly themselves? How can we create even connection-worthy messaging within an event that you think would really connect well with a donor base or with the people that we're really trying to serve?
Gosh, there was something that you said in there that sort of triggered some thoughts on my end in terms of sort of how people think about like how they show up to the event and the experiences they want to create. And we hear a lot in the sector around like, because you said something really interesting. We hear a lot around like, ditch the gala, right? Ditch the event. Like it's not a high ROI for your fundraising inside the nonprofit sector. And I'm not quite so flippant about it, because the reality is that if you think about it in the way you described, as a touch point, as a peak moment, as a relationship builder. Now, this doesn't mean you're not being transparent around the goals of it, right? It doesn't mean that you can't also have the goal of raising money at the event. But if you're not thinking about the ROI just in a transactional short-term nature of the event itself, like before you can really determine whether or not an event is a good investment for your organization, you should really be sort of testing giving by event attendance and people who don't attend the event over the whole year, right? Like people often just look, and truthfully, multiple years. Like mostly people just look like, how much did I spend on that event? And then how much did I raise at that event? But that is a very transactional, limited view of the impact of that event. So I just think that the point that you made around like, yes, be clear about your intention, but then also recognize sort of the other touch points that are invited into a shared experience is like a really important nuance for folks to hold.
And I think I read on your LinkedIn description, I think, but it was something about not hounding people for money. And if you could dive into that a little bit, because I think sometimes as event planners, we plan our event and we talk a lot here at Candy about both planning and promoting your event, and that it needs to be done together, that there's this marriage between how we're messaging and getting the word out about the event, but it has to be really married well with what we're trying to accomplish and the purpose of getting people in a room or on a Zoom. So this idea of not hounding people for money, what then do people do if, where does that hounding come from? And then what are the alternatives for us to really have people engaged and excited about attending an event?
Yeah. An example in terms of the language, it's no problem at all if it's not a fit. Like I thought I had the sense that we were aligned around X, Y, and Z, and you'd be interested in this. No problem at all if you're not, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to invite you to this, to create this connection, to make this introduction, if it did feel like it was aligned with your goals around X, Y, and Z, right? So that's focusing on alignment. And what I say around alignment fundraising is that it's alignment first fundraising as opposed to money first fundraising. So what alignment first does is like trying to figure out whether or not we actually are in alignment. Like for people who are raising money, you do not want money at all costs. Some money is very expensive to accept, right? Like we have all taken money that we wish we did not take if you are in the fundraising sector. So this money as the only thing of value, as our primary focus, as like our tunnel vision, that messes us up in like every possible way. And that's where the hounding comes in, right? We feel like we're like hounding people for money at all costs. We want to get the money at all costs. And I had somebody early when I was developing my practice talk about how they felt like a car salesperson. And I really sat with that image and I was like, why do car salespeople make us uncomfortable? And I was like, oh, it's because we believe that the car salesperson wants to sell us the car, whether or not it's the right car for us, right? And that's why we go into those dealerships having done so much research, because we do not feel like we can trust that person to actually guide us through that process in a way that keeps our interests, needs, experience central to the conversation. And that is a lot of times when how we've been taught to fundraise. And so that like don't hound people for money is like focus on alignment first. The money is one expression of alignment. It's one expression of how we bring our assets together to do something in partnership and connected to each other. But if money is the first lens through which we view anything, then we end up hounding people for money because we're asking the wrong people and we're asking them in the wrong way.
And as freeing as what you're describing seems to be, and I know from experience can be, there is some fear around that because it does mean changing something, like you said earlier, that has been done before, that rinse and repeat that we tend to do, whether that's in your events or other type of fundraising. It is something that I think as we challenge ourselves and our teams, whether you call it innovation or disruption or whatever you want to call it, to have that ability to question and be curious about how we can do this differently. And when you're talking about, I love the analogy of the car salesman. They've got blinders on, they've got a job to do, and they've got, numbers to crunch at the end of the month. And then at the end of the day, they may or may not ever talk to that person again. I appreciate in the world of fundraising, again, the pressure that is there. I don't know that we can ever completely remove the full-on pressure for people that this is your job. You're leaning in, you're working with a team, and there are expectations. Just as we start to wrap this conversation, what encouragement maybe could you give to those that are out there and eventually will be getting your book and learning more, kind of having the tips that you give in the book, having that at their fingertips? But what would you maybe share with the planners out there that are feeling really overwhelmed right now? They don't know where to start. There's that feeling like, this all sounds great, but I've got this deadline. I'll deal with that later. I'm going to have that conversation later. I'm not quite totally burnt out yet. I'm going to, I've heard that on a bunch of calls. But, what would you say would be a great place just to start?
I think the first part is recognizing that there really is no later in dealing with your stress. Like your ability to do things right this second that decrease your stress are going to make you more effective in all of those things that you think are more important. So I'm going to give you a few really quick strategies to start to use right away. One is to acknowledge and validate how we feel. We have a total misconception that we need like tough love, and that if we acknowledge and validate how we feel, then we're like making it true or it's going to take us over. No, we just need to say to ourselves, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling overwhelmed. Just say to yourself, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's proven to downregulate your nervous system. It's from Britt Frank's book, The Science of Stuck. And it's like pouring a bucket of cold water on a fire. So you're feeling that level of overwhelm, acknowledge and validate how you're feeling. You can also use something called distant self-talk. This is from Dr. Ethan Kross's book called Chatter, where you say a positive statement but you use you and your first name. So you've handled deadlines like this before, Mallory. You know what to do. Or you've navigated a complicated donor experience like this before, Mallory. You're going to be okay. When we use our first name and you, it sort of pulls us out of the drama of the situation, and we're able to witness it and sort of like cultivate the witness a little bit more there. Another thing is to really try to increase your curiosity. So none of the things that I'm talking about take a lot of time. None of them you really have to prioritize over your strategy. These are ways to improve your experience in your brain and body as you're doing this work. So increase your curiosity. Notice where you're getting really tunnel visioned or binary or judgmental about something. Oh, we can't do that because last year, blah, blah, blah. Or we can never do that because this one donor, this one time got upset about it, right? Like, and just open up a tiny bit of curiosity. What might it look like for you to play with that again? What might be possible if you allowed yourself to imagine blank instead? Okay, you get news that you thought you ordered round tables and they're rectangle tables. And so there's 2 less people at everyone, and it's throwing your nervous system into like, the deep end, right? Okay, what might round tables allow for that the rectangle tables didn't? Is there a game or a bowl of questions you could put in the middle? What's possible with 8 people at a table instead of 10 people? Like, just starting yourself to get yourself more curious. All of these things are scientifically proven to downregulate your nervous system, help you get out of a stress state, and give you more clarity for moving forward. And then just to but I'm going to go back, all of those things to like acknowledging and validating the overwhelm that you feel, and like having compassion for yourself around those things is just a really, really important piece of the puzzle. And so what's often really helpful is sort of like getting out of that like tough love cognitive space of, I just need to figure this out. Like, I just need to like bear down and, answer this question or respond to this email, and actually saying like, gosh, I feel stressed right now. I literally just did a podcast interview with somebody, and I acknowledged and validated something about what they said on the call. After she like said something out loud, she's like, this is the first time I'm actually admitting this out loud. And her boss was on the call also. So it was like the two of them together. And she was like, wow, just saying that, like, I feel so much better.
Wow.
And I think we don't realize like that's my whole piece of my story around my connection to myself, and what that allowed for is like all the tools I just gave you are about improving your relationship with yourself and feeling more connected to yourself. And then that is actually what gives you the capacity and the clarity to be able to move forward with whatever it is that you're dealing with.
And I do think too, as we build our teams, when we have that stance and when we are using these tools, we'll also onboard our volunteers, or we'll be working with our in-house teams in different ways that will be an encouragement to them as well. We never work in silos. There's always going to be other people that are bumping up against our stress, or how we're dealing with a situation, or how we're even talking to our donors before, during, and after an event. What a fantastic way for us to start. Thank you so much for this time together. I am so excited to read the book and to learn more about your work and to continue this conversation. If someone is interested in taking a look at what you have to offer, maybe even getting the book or having that conversation with you, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they find sort of their first start into really feeling better about how they're showing up for their donors?
Yeah, thank you. You can, if you go to my website, malloryerickson.com/book, you can grab a copy of the book. And then if you're interested in being coached by me and being a part of the Alignment Fundraising Collective, you're like, ooh, that's the way I want to fundraise. That's the way I want to sort of be in community of other people fundraising that way. I have like a group coaching program, $49 a month to month. So try to make it really accessible. You get 2 group coaching calls with me, with me once a month and every month. And then there's like a collective opportunity for Q&A and stuff like that. And so it's really for people who are like looking for, they're like, that's the type of fundraising I want to be doing, to have some like group support and accountability. So those are kind of the 2 easiest ways. And then follow me on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm constantly told that I give way too much away for free. My podcast, What the Fundraising. So like, if you want quick tips and tools, I'm always putting them out there. And there's no shortage. Subscribe to What the Fundraising and the podcast, and you'll get a lot of this as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. It has given me an uplift today too, to really see how I'm showing up to take some things off my plate and then use some of those tools as well. So thanks so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.